If the Jets want to get their first win of 2025 in Cincinnati against the Bengals, some positive news from the injury report would be a big boost. Locked On Jets starts now.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Friday, October 24th, 2025, and I'm your host, John B. from GanggreenNation.com, thanking you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. A big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday, and today's episode is brought to you by Mazda. Like our players, we sweat every detail, because when you make every move count, pulling off the unexpected is only the beginning. Stay tuned later for highlights in this week's Moving the Game Forward. Mazda, move and be moved. Well, on today's show, we are previewing the Week 8 game between the New York Jets and the Cincinnati Bengals Sunday from Cincinnati. Kickoff time scheduled for 1 p.m. Eastern. The Jets are looking for their first win of the season. And when you are 0-7, you are leaning on the phrase any given Sunday. We'll talk about what that means for the New York Jets on today's show. The Jets are also going to need to continue their recent defensive surge. We'll talk about what they'll need to do on that side of the ball. But we're going to begin by talking about the injury report. And of course, injuries are a key component in the NFL. You want to stay healthy. They're not really a great excuse in most cases for your team losing. Every team suffers injuries. Football is a very physical game. But this week, I think the injury report has special significance for the New York Jets, because there are two key spots, maybe the most important player on offense and the most important player on defense, where there's a lack of clarity on the injury report. Now, on the offensive side of the ball, most of us have assumed that Tyrod Taylor started this game at quarterback for the New York Jets because Justin Fields has looked, frankly, unplayable the last couple of weeks. But Taylor is day-to-day with a knee injury. He apparently took a big hit after taking over for Fields in last Sunday's loss to the Carolina Panthers. Aaron Glenn has not revealed the identity of the starting quarterback on Sunday, and he said he does not want to give the Bengals an advantage. And when he said that, you could hear the eyes rolling in the Jets fan base, because when coaches start getting super secretive about stuff like this in a season where things aren't going well anyway, in a season where you're not really confident in either quarterback, you ask why he's doing it. I actually will defend Glenn on this. I think sometimes Glenn gets secretive in a way that doesn't really help the Jets. I remember heading into week 1 before the Elijah Vera Tucker injury made the point moot. There was a bit of a question whether the Jets would start Josh Myers or Joe Tippmann at center. And Glenn did not reveal that because he did not want to give the Pittsburgh Steelers an advantage. And that was kind of silly, because the Steelers' game plan was not going to change whether Josh Myers or Joe Tippmann played center. At the quarterback position, though, there is some difference between the way Tyrod Taylor and Justin Fields play the game. They're both nominally mobile quarterbacks, but their mobility is used in different ways. Taylor's is more to extend plays. Sometimes he'll scramble it, but he's not a guy you're going to design. You're going to create a lot of designed runs around. Fields should be. Now, the Jets haven't been doing that with Fields, and I think that's part of the issue with Justin Fields so far, is that the Jets' offensive coordinator, Tanner Engstrand, has not done a very good job of not really made much effort to design an offense around the things Fields is supposed to do well. And I'm not making an excuse. Fields has played his way out of the lineup. The way Fields has played is unacceptable, and Fields is in year 5. There's only so much you can blame everyone else when the young quarterback fails. But the Jets should have used Fields as a runner more. Taylor, you're not really going to use that much as a runner. Taylor is a guy, and we saw this last week, he's not afraid to throw the ball deep. Fields during his Chicago days was an aggressive deep thrower, but he hasn't been a deep thrower with the Jets. Taylor's a guy you're going to run a more conventional NFL offense around. He's been around the NFL for a decade and a half, whereas Fields is still very much developing as a passer. So I do think, stylistically, it does complicate things a bit for a defense if you're not sure whether you're playing Justin Fields or Tyrod Taylor. The things you do defensively actually may change quite a bit. So I'm going to defend Aaron Glenn by not revealing the identity of the starter. I think common sense, though, would dictate if Tyrod Taylor is healthy, Tyrod Taylor will play. And you certainly hope that Tyrod Taylor will play from a Jets perspective. Not that there's a lot of confidence in Tyrod Taylor, not that there should be a lot of confidence in Tyrod Taylor. He's a guy who, except for 3 seasons with the Buffalo Bills from 2015 through 2017, has been a career backup. and he's been a career backup for reasons that are pretty obvious. I mean, all you've had to do is watch him during his Jets appearances this year to see why he hasn't been a starting quarterback in this league, where he's another guy, just like Fields, who holds the ball for too long. He takes bad sacks. He's not very accurate, especially on the deep ball. We saw that last Sunday where he missed a couple of deep throws. I mean, there are issues with Taylor, but at this point, Fields just seems so rattled, like he can't even throw a screen pass. While I'm not expecting the Jets offense to produce big results with Tyrod Taylor in there, Taylor can at least get the ball out. Taylor at least gives you a chance in a way Fields, because of his lack of confidence right now, does not. So I think the Jets, if they want to have any real chance of pulling the upset, need Tyrod Taylor in the lineup. There's also some questions about the best player on defense for the Jets, Sauce Gardner. And, Sauce Gardner had some hiccups early this season, a couple of bad games, but he's picked it up as of late. And I think we're to the point where, and I have to be fair here, because I was criticizing Sauce Gardner when he was struggling a little bit earlier in the season, and it's been crickets from me since he started picking it up. We're at the point now where Sauce Gardner is having a Sauce Gardner level season. Unfortunately, he left Sunday's game against Carolina with a concussion, and through Thursday, he has not been cleared to return yet. And this is a game where the Jets really need Sauce Gardner. This is the type of game that you paid Sauce Gardner $30 million a year to handle, because you're going up against a Cincinnati passing attack that's led by Jamar Chase, one of the top receivers in the NFL. And the performance against Chase for the Jets this weekend is especially important because the Bengals have a quarterback, Joe Flacco, who is trying to learn the Cincinnati offense on the fly. Now, Flacco's been around the league, of course. He's played with multiple teams. He's been in pretty much every system imaginable. So he's going to be a quick study. But he's not sure the intricacies and the nuances of the Cincinnati system. You can't be after you were just acquired 2 weeks ago. So what does Flacco do? Well, Flacco is really focusing on just throwing the ball to one of the best receivers in the NFL. Last week, the Bengals played a Thursday night game against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Jamar Chase had 23 targets in that game. So this is a receiver Flacco's going to go to. It's a combination of how good Chase is, and it's partially because Flacco, doesn't really know the Cincinnati system inside and out yet. So if you don't know the system, well, it's never a bad decision to throw the ball to one of the elite receivers in the NFL. The Jets are going to have a big issue with Jamar Chase if Sauce Gardner does not play in this game. This is going to be a great matchup, and I would expect that if Gardner is in the lineup, you'll see times where Gardner wins. You'll see times when Chase wins. But the quickest path to eliminate any possibility of a Jets upset is one of Cincinnati's game breakers taking this game over. If Jamar Chase throws up another 16 for 161 and a touchdown like he did last week, it's going to be very difficult for the Jets to have a shot to pull off the upset here. And part of the challenge is that the Bengals have maybe the best number 2 receiver in the league, T. Higgins, who is a guy who would probably be a number 1 receiver on half the teams in the league. And last week, in addition to Chase's 23 targets, Higgins had 10, and Higgins threw up 6 catches for 96 yards and a touchdown. So Flacco threw the ball in that game last week 47 times. 33 of the 47 went to either Higgins or Chase. And there were only 45 targets because he actually threw the ball away twice. So it shows you the extent to which he's just relying on matchups that he's got. Jets are going to have enough issues dealing with T. Higgins. Now, I do think Brandon Stevens has started to improve. Stevens is no longer the disaster that he was the first couple weeks of the season. T. Higgins is going to be a tough matchup. If the Jets don't have Sauce Gardner in there, what's the plan here? We're going to have Stevens against Jamar Chase. That's going to be ugly. Are we putting Higgins against the rookie Azariah Thomas? Similarly, that's going to be an issue for the Jets. And, you essentially make it much more difficult if Sauce Gardner is not in there. Of course, injuries are always important. Injuries are something teams have to overcome. The old line is a cliche, next man up. But some injuries are more significant than others. Right now, the Jets have question marks about who's going to play quarterback and whether their number 1 corner, one of the best corners in the NFL, is going to be available against an elite receiver group. There are injuries that you can work around. These would be injuries that would be very difficult for the New York Jets to work around. So you have to hope that on Friday, there's some good news on the injury front. Now, during the Locked On Jets podcast, we're going to talk about a unit where there's been good news lately. The defense, which looked completely lost for the first 5 weeks of the season. They've posted back-to-back strong performances. This could be the week that tells you whether this improvement is for real, though. And we'll discuss why as we continue here on this Friday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL season has arrived, and FanDuel has an offer you don't want to miss, because right now new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. Pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. FanDuel gives you so many ways to play. You can build parlays, you can try player props, you can even follow the live line during games. It makes watching football even more exciting when you've got a little something riding on the action. Whether you're a casual fan or love diving into the stats, FanDuel makes the game day experience so much better. And looking ahead to Sunday, it's Week 8 action in Cincinnati. Jets are 6.5-point underdogs against the Cincinnati Bengals. And I mean, if you watch the Jets this year, that line may seem a little bit low. Nobody's really expecting the Jets to win, but if you want to get in on the action one way or another, you can do it on FanDuel. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today to get started. Again, visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. And a big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes through the week, each day, Monday through Friday. We are getting ready for Week 8 action. The Jets are in Cincinnati, trying to get their first win of the season against the Cincinnati Bengals. You know, if you're looking for some symmetry here, the last time the Jets played in Cincinnati was 2019. And that was Adam Gase's first season, a very, very difficult season for the New York Jets. And in that game, it was the weekend of Thanksgiving. And Gase famously left his Thanksgiving dinner early with his family to go game plan. The Jets lost to a Cincinnati team that was 0-11. So the Bengals in November of that year got their first win against the Jets. Maybe the Jets can turn the tables in late October, get their first win of the season against the Bengals in their most recent trip to Cincinnati. But for that to happen, we're going to need to see this Jets defense play a very strong game. And there has been a dramatic turnaround the last 2 weeks in the performance of this unit. The first 5 weeks, it was absolutely dreadful. It was one of the worst defenses in the NFL. Now, the other day, Jets owner Woody Johnson made some headlines for some comments he made about Justin Fields. And I addressed those comments on Wednesday's show. One of the things Woody Johnson said when he was addressing the team that kind of flew under the radar was that the defense is good. Now, the defense is not good. The defense is the 26th ranked scoring defense in the NFL. It has been very bad in 5 of the 7 games. Saying that the defense is good, once again, shows you a complete lack of acumen in analyzing football by Woody Johnson. What I would say is that there has been a dramatic turnaround since the Jets went to London 2 weeks ago and played the Denver Broncos. You are now seeing a defense that's making plays. You're seeing a defense that's playing sound football. A lot of the issues that plagued this Jets defense in the early part of the season have started to dissipate. You know, you are occasionally seeing breakdowns in coverage, but not on the wide scale you saw them the first couple weeks of the season. You are seeing the Jets tackle sound. You're seeing the Jets play more fundamentally sound football. You're seeing guys read keys better. Now, part of this, I think, has been due to personnel changes. 3 big ones. I mean, Jets essentially had 3 new starters 2 weeks ago against Denver. Jermaine Johnson returned to the lineup after missing multiple games with an ankle injury. And, you know, Jermaine Johnson return to the lineup was significant because every snap he gets was a snap that either Michael Clemens or Tyler Barron or Braden McGregor was not getting. And the quality difference between a Jermaine Johnson snap and a Clemens/McGregor/Barron snap is dramatic. And even when Johnson's not making plays, he's not getting wiped out the way those other guys were. You know, I think sometimes like we obsess over like the Pro Football Focus grades, but PFF grades don't tell the whole story. Jermaine's PFF grades have been okay, nothing spectacular. But there's a big difference between Jermaine and those other guys being in there just because he's not getting like annihilated. He's not getting wiped out. And that's had a big impact on the defense. I think you also look at the safety position. Malachi Moore taking over for Tony Adams at safety. Moore is not a perfect player right now. He's a rookie, but he's playing well. He's playing much better than Adams played. Adams got to the point where, you know, he was borderline unplayable. Moore's out there playing solid football. And as we like grasp for hope with this new regime, Aaron Glenn and Darren Muji, I think the fact that you have a day 3 rookie going out there looking pretty good as a starter, that's a real positive. You know, there are not many reasons for hope right now. I think that's one of the tough things about this Jets start is it's not just that the team has been bad, it's that in the first year of a new head coach, a new GM, you're looking for things that can make you believe that they know what they're doing, that they have this thing on the right track. Even if the results aren't there on Sundays, even if you're not winning a lot of games, you want to see data points that like things are moving in the right direction. We don't have many right now, but the play of Malachi Moore, I think, is one of them. And then also Jarvis Brownlee Jr., who took over for Michael Carter II as a slot corner. Brownlee's a pretty sound tackler, and Carter, I've been a big Michael Carter II fan. He has not looked, before he got injured, he did not look comfortable in this scheme at all. I mean, there were so many times where it just looked like he had no idea where to go, where he was breaking the wrong way, and I think a lot of the coverage busts were on Carter in the early stages of the season. And maybe I'm a fool. I actually think Michael Carter II can bounce back, but getting him out of the lineup and maybe replacing him, and I hope he comes back and plays stronger for the Jets. There's been an improvement, but I think this game is going to tell us a lot about how much this improvement is for real, because the last two games, it's undeniable. The Jets have been facing younger quarterbacks who are inconsistent, and younger quarterbacks who, frankly, have missed some throws to open receivers. Now, part of this is when you're playing sound defense, you're not giving up the huge plays as frequently as the Jets have done the last couple of weeks. You force the defense to drive the field. The first 5 weeks of the season, it didn't matter if a quarterback missed a throw, because the Jets would bust a coverage on the next play and there'd be another throw available. When you force the other team to play at a higher level, though, when you're not constantly busting coverages, when you force them to make tough throws, sometimes it produces good results for your defense. But 2 weeks only means so much, and these were not juggernaut offenses the Jets faced. And look, I think without Joe Burrow, Cincinnati's not a juggernaut offense, but they have a veteran quarterback with Joe Flacco. Flacco knows where to get the ball. And where to get the ball is, his two star receivers. And this is an offense in Cincinnati that has a lot of firepower. I think it has more firepower than the Carolina Panthers had. It has more firepower than the Denver Broncos had. These are guys who are two star receivers. Again, maybe two of the top 15 receivers in football. Jamar Chase, you can make a case, depending on the year it is. There have been years where you could make a case Jamar Chase was the best receiver in football, the most explosive playmaker. And T. Higgins, again, he's a guy who on a lot of teams in this league would be a number one receiver. And he's their number two receiver. And it makes covering so much more difficult, because there are going to be plays where Jamar Chase takes off, where you can just make T. Higgins the number one read. So you can't really roll your coverage to Jamar Chase the whole game. That's why Sauce Gardner being in the lineups is so important. But it also, there are other aspects that just makes quarterback play easier. I mean, there are some plays where you have a guy where you have three receivers on one side, one receiver on the other side. The one receiver isolated on the other side, sometimes not in the progression. But if you like the matchup as a quarterback, you could throw the ball to him. It's so much easier if your number one read is Jamar Chase and the guy on the other side is T. Higgins, who's not in the progression. You may like the T. Higgins matchup. So you can throw the ball to him, or you can just throw the ball to your number one read, Jamar Chase. I mean, that makes it really difficult to defend. And that's, again, this goes back to why Sauce Gardner is so critical. This is going to be a real test for the Jets. And while the results of the last 2 weeks have been encouraging, it's only 2 weeks. And sometimes you see this in the NFL, particularly when a team makes wholesale changes on a unit, offense or defense, where you see a lot of new personnel enter the lineup. Sometimes it sparks a team short term. Sometimes guys are excited because they're getting their chance. And they play over their heads for a couple of weeks, and then they kind of fall back to earth. This is going to be an important game. This is going to, if the Jets play another strong defensive game, I'm going to start believing that this thing is for real. That this defense that they figured out this defense, that they've turned it around. And again, that's important from the standpoint that we're looking for things right now, and there aren't a lot that suggest that this coaching staff has a handle on how to fix the problems. If we get this defense, if they have fixed half of this team on the fly, that's a huge boost of confidence for me in this coaching staff. And it's the type of thing that means that they're going to win games, because if you have a good defense, eventually you're going to run into a game where you win a low scoring affair. I mean, the Jets have held their opponents at 13 points the last 2 weeks. At some point, if your defense keeps playing like that, eventually you'll get enough offense to win. If it falls back to earth, well, then we're back to the drawing board. So a lot on the line for this defense. And by the way, if the Jets defense plays well, they're going to have a great shot at winning this game. I mean, as bad as the offense has been the last 2 weeks, they've been one play away from winning both games. So, defense got to keep doing what it's doing. And if it does, then, we could be finally in a position where we have something positive to talk about with the New York Jets. But of course, when you're 0-7, you lean on one phrase. And the head here on the Locked On Jets podcast, We're going to talk about that phrase. It's any given Sunday. Can the New York Jets finally get their first win of the season? Well, there's some things beyond their control. And there are some things that just may be unexpected that could lead to an upset win. We'll discuss as we continue here on this Friday edition of the Locked On Jets podcast. This episode is brought to you by Mazda's Moving the Game Forward. For those who believe it's not just about playing the game, it's about redefining it. There are moments that do more than put points on the board. They move crowds, move culture, and keep moving the game forward. And this week's moment that moved the game forward is the support Jets fans continue to give this team. I mean, we could talk about the recent defensive performance. We could talk about individual players who are standing out on a bad team. But let's face it, this is not a fun team to root for. We're heading for a 15th straight year with no playoffs. They can't win games. They can't really seem to ever get their act together. And if we're going to be perfectly honest, the owner embarrassed himself and the franchise this week with some really bad comments. But Jets fans keep showing up. They show their loyalty. I mean, nothing moves the game forward like a fan base as loyal as Jets fans. And when you follow what moves you, the unexpected is only the beginning. Just like there's more to every highlight, there's more to a Mazda vehicle. Mazda. Move and be moved. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, getting you ready for Week 8 action. The New York Jets in Cincinnati looking for their first win of the 2025 season. They take on the Bengals Sunday. And at this point of the season, unfortunately, we need to turn to a phrase that's kind of a cliche in the NFL, any given Sunday. I think that even with Joe Flacco starting this game for the Cincinnati Bengals, and look, Flacco's had a late career resurgence. I think Flacco's had one of the most interesting career arcs of any quarterback in recent memory in the NFL, because, the Baltimore Ravens drafted him all the way back in 2008. He started as a rookie. He was serviceable. He slowly improved through the course of his career. Ended up winning the Super Bowl in 2012. That, brought about the meme, "Is Joe Flacco elite?" And then after the Super Bowl, it felt like that was kind of a launching point for Flacco to, enter that top echelon of quarterbacks. He kind of regressed after that, and slowly got to the point where he was a backup. Maybe he was a quality backup, then kind of a low quality backup with the Jets. And then in his late 30s, at like 38, 2 years ago against Cleveland, he has this renaissance. And suddenly, once again, he's a guy who's a starting caliber quarterback in this league. But Joe Flacco is no Joe Burrow, particularly at this point in their respective careers. Even with Joe Flacco in the lineup, the Jets are pretty substantial underdogs. Jets are underdogs, according to our partners at FanDuel, by about a touchdown in this game. So how can the Jets win this game? Well, obviously we talked in the first segment about the importance of Tyrod Taylor and Sauce Gardner playing in this game. I think it's going to have to be another game where the Jets defense stands tall. But of course, in the NFL, there are always things that are unpredictable. And, the whole Justin Fields saga this week actually reminds me of something that happened in December 2 years ago with Zach Wilson. The Jets had benched Zach Wilson in the 2023 season. And Zach Wilson's play had not been good, but there were a lot of other issues with the Jets at that point. The offensive line was terrible. The wide receiver group outside of Garrett Wilson was terrible. Nathaniel Hackett was a terrible offensive coordinator. And it really felt like the Jets essentially put all the blame on Zach Wilson's shoulders. Now, they got to the point in the season where, I felt like, they had to try something new at the quarterback position, but things quickly failed. Tim Boyle did not play very well in Wilson's place. Trevor Siemian was in the mix. So the Jets turned back to Zach Wilson in the game against Houston. And that was a week of great controversy because there were reports that broke that week that Zach Wilson was reluctant to go back in there. Now, what we found out later was the reason Zach Wilson was reluctant to go back in there was the Jets had told him weeks earlier that he was finished in New York. They told him, you're not coming back next year. We're trading you. And then they come back to him. Then they come back to him shortly later and say, "Hey, Zach, want to start this game?" I mean, wouldn't you be reluctant in that situation? Zach Wilson was a lightning rod for criticism that week. He went out and had the best game of his career. He lit up the Houston Texans. And I mean, I'm not saying I would expect the same thing if Justin Fields has to start, but it did remind me a little bit of the Zach Wilson situation from 2 years ago against Houston. Everything that happened with Justin Fields this week, with the owner coming out and doing the things that you would expect Woody Johnson to do, never pointing the finger at somebody else. Instead of supporting your player, bashing your player. Instead of taking accountability for your own faults, pointing the finger at someone else. That's what Woody Johnson does. So Justin Fields was kind of in the spotlight this week for reasons that he should not have been. Everyone's down on Justin Fields. Look, if Justin Fields plays this game, it's going to be tough because of what the Jets will not have at wide receiver, because there's very little indication Garrett Wilson's going to be back at this game. He has not yet been back in practice this week. And one of the things I said last week is there's not even really a point in putting Garrett Wilson out as a decoy, because even if Garrett Wilson's drawing attention, it's not like any of the other receivers can win a one-on-one. And if you had receivers that were would have struggled if other teams were keying on them, but they can win a one-on-one, then Garrett Wilson out there as a decoy would make sense. But you don't have anybody who can win even when Garrett Wilson's drawing attention and Garrett Wilson's healthy. But in the NFL, unexpected things happen. Even the second out of game season, the Jets won 2 games. They were both against teams that eventually made the playoffs. One was against the Los Angeles Rams. One was against the Cleveland Browns a week later. In the Rams game, I think what happened was pretty clear. The Rams did not take the game seriously. They thought they had an easy win against the Jets. Jets jumped out to a 3-score lead early in the third quarter. The Rams started playing at that point. The Rams started taking the game seriously. They almost stormed back and won. In fact, they probably would have won if Braden Mann, the Jets punter, had not made a touchdown-saving tackle on a punt return. But in the NFL, sometimes the game is decided by the better team taking the lesser team for granted, taking a win for granted. A week later against the Cleveland Browns, the Jets won because the Browns, this was 2020, so it was the year of COVID. The Browns had a COVID outbreak in the wide receiver room, so the Browns had practically no wide receivers for the game. Of course, that's not going to happen this week, but it's a reminder that unexpected things happen in the NFL all the time. And you always see results. It feels like every week, if not every week, every other week, where there's a shocking upset. And people always ask, how is that possible? People who watch the NFL for decades ask, how is that possible? Well, if you watch the NFL for a long time, you realize that the better team does not always win games. Sometimes crazy things happen. Sometimes a guy just takes a game over. And look, the Jets have players who are capable of taking over a game. Quinnen Williams could throw up, 2.5 sacks in a game. Quinnen Williams could shut down the Bengals offense almost single-handedly if he's playing at his peak. On the offensive side of the ball, like Breece Hall could, Breece Hall could throw up 200 yards from scrimmage. I'm not saying these are the most likely outcomes, but these are things that are possible. Or you could also have just a guy who comes out of nowhere, a guy who surprises you by having the game of his life. I remember back in 2014, the Jets had this guy, Jaquan Jarrett, who had this monster game against the Pittsburgh Steelers, a pretty good Steelers team, a Steelers team that ended up winning the AFC North that year. The Jets were dismal that year. That was the Idzik Rex year where they had no corners. Jaquan Jarrett ended up having this monster game out of nowhere. A guy who was a career backup, a guy who never played that well again, ended up, kind of carrying the Jets to a win. Is there some depth player on the Jets who could step up and just have the game of his life? Of course. And when things are bleak, and when you're trying to figure out reasons to continue watching a team, those moments are the things that kind of give you hope. If you're watching the Jets right now, you're probably really frustrated. There aren't a lot of things to feel great about right now. There aren't a lot of reasons for hope. And I think that's especially true as we get ready for this game. I think almost everybody expects the Cincinnati Bengals to win. Almost everybody expects the Cincinnati Bengals to win quite comfortably at home, especially after a great win against the Pittsburgh Steelers kind of saved their season. But in the NFL, unexpected things happen. You get outlier performances. There's a reason that since the NFL has moved to the 17-game schedule, no team's ever finished 0-17. Eventually, you just run into a great game by you or a bad game by your opponent. And there's a reason that even in the 16-game schedule, only 2 teams ever went 0-16. It's hard to never win a game. You don't know when the win's going to pop up when you're a team like the Jets, but it's possible any given Sunday. And maybe this Sunday will be the given Sunday where the Jets finally get their first win of 2025. I hope so, because, man, it is tough to follow this team. So hopefully for all of us, this will be a surprise. But that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out. It helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your weekend and enjoy the game. We'll be back after to break down what happens between the New York Jets and the Cincinnati Bengals.